We
Absolutely.
have been celebrating all things Bruce. In 1982, Queen Elizabeth installed him as a Knight of the Thistle. So, one impressive chief they've got there.
Absolutely. Is there anything he hasn't done? Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of On the Sofa. I'm Monja from our Edinburgh store, and joining me tonight is Kalyn to discuss Clan Bruce.
Hi, I'm Kalyn, joining you from New York City. In addition to acting as ScotlandShop's resident clan researcher, I'm also a graduate student in history at Fordham University with a focus in Scottish history. So I absolutely love being able to immerse myself in it both in my studies and at work. We actually have a whole section on our website dedicated to each of the Scottish clans. So if you're interested in finding out more about the history of your clan, then we certainly recommend taking a look.
Absolutely. And there are over 500 clan and family associations registered around the world. There are hundreds and hundreds. So I'm sure there is one to suit you. So we do love learning new bits of history and hearing from our customers how they explored their heritage and traced their roots. We love digging into the often bloody and brutal stories that go along with most clans, highlighting the lesser known bits of Scottish clan history as well as the work of the clan societies around the world. So please let us know if you've got anything to add or even any stories to share with us.
This past month, very exciting, especially for Monja and I, we
Absolutely.
have been celebrating all things Bruce, which we've learned is more correctly known as the family of Bruce rather than Clan Bruce. So join us tonight as we delve into this clan's history and discover some of their most intriguing stories from the past and present. We'll be learning about some of their most famous events throughout history, famous faces, old and new, and so much more. We always welcome your input, so if you're associated with the Bruces and you have stories to share or questions to ask, please let us know in the comments.
Absolutely. So let's get into where it all started before we get to our favourite parts about Clan Bruce. So the Bruce family is descended from Robert de Bruce, First Lord of Annandale, who came to England in 1106. As such, Annandale, along with Clackmannan and Elgin, are territories associated with Clan Bruce. Because the Bruces also produced a line of royal Scots, they are historically associated with several castles all throughout Scotland. As such, Aberdeenshire, Falkirk, Ince, South Ayrshire, Perth, and Kinross, it's quite a mouthful there, are also territories in which one can find some great Bruce history. So the history of the name itself gives us a few clues about areas associated with the family. So the name Bruce actually potentially has several origins. One comes from the French de Bruce, or pronounced the same to me at least, but spelled slightly differently, de Bruce, is in reference to the land known today as Breen Normandy. In Normandy, sorry. Another origin is from the Flemish de Bruce, derived from the lands now called Bruges in Belgium, which kind of makes sense. They sort of sound, I don't think that's too much stretch to put those two together.
Probably not. So now on to the chief. The current chief is Andrew Douglas Alexander Thomas Bruce, 11th Earl of 11th Earl of Elgin and 15th Earl of Kincardine. So Lord Elgin is the 37th in the line of chiefs of the name and family of Bruce. He and Lady Elgin reside at the family estate Broomhall, which I believe we might talk about later, but if not, on the clan page. So in 1951, he was appointed a Justice of the Peace. He was Deputy Lieutenant of Fife from 1955 to 1987 and acted as Lord Lieutenant from 1987 to 1999. A lot of stuff going on there. In addition, in 1980, he was appointed by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II as her Lord High Commissioner to the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland, and he was later reappointed in 1981. Finally, in 1982, Queen Elizabeth installed him as a Knight of the Thistle. So, one impressive chief they've got there.
Absolutely. Is there anything he hasn't done?
Don't think so.
So, moving on from the chief to Bruce Castles, which is also actually really impressive, Clackmannan Tower. So, King David II, who was son of King Robert the Bruce, one of our favourites.
I think that's the first mention. I
The
think
first
that's
mention. Actually, quite impressive for a Bruce episode that's our first mention of Robert the Bruce.
Yeah.
So Robert the Bruce granted his cousin, also Sir Robert Bruce, sorry, which is incredibly confusing. We know. Try and bear with us. So he granted his cousin the lands of Clackmannan Tower in 1359. So prior to this, it is thought that a royal residence existed on this original site during the reign of Malcolm IV from 1053 to 1056. So you can spot the tower from miles around as it sits right on top of King's Seat Hill. Well worth going to have a wee look at. So today, only the exterior of the tower can be viewed. However, no appointment is needed, and you can make the 10 to 15-minute walk up there any time of year. So it's definitely a wonderful place to visit. And if you are a Bruce coming over to Scotland and you want to check it out, really easy to go and see the tower.
That sounds awesome. I'm going to add that to my trip itinerary.
Tour list. I'm sure you'll have that quite packed in, the amount of places you've got to go and see while you're here.
It's true, especially after any of our Clan of the Month on the Sofa videos. I at least have like 3 more things that I need to add, including the next thing. So the next bit that we have to mention is all about one of the most famous Scottish artifacts, the Stone of Destiny.
Absolutely.
Although, is the stone in Scotland currently, or is it in England? Because I know there was a scandal about.
There was a scandal. I don't actually know where it currently is. That's a very interesting point.
If someone knows, if someone knows, let us know. I'm sure someone watching this knows where the stone is, because maybe that needs to get added to, the England itinerary.
Yes.
Potentially.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you don't know what the stone is, it's not only an important piece of Scottish history, but it's also integral to the story of Robert the Bruce's reign. Although its exact origins are unknown, it was used for centuries in the inauguration of the Kings of Scotland and is actually considered a sacred object. In 1296, King Edward I of England stole the stone from the Scots. That was scandal number 1.
Absolutely appalling.
It was then housed at Westminster and was used in the coronation ceremonies of the monarchs of England rather than Scotland. And as such, Robert the Bruce was crowned King of Scots in 1306 in Scone, but he was the very first Scottish king to be crowned without the stone.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately.
It's shocking.
But if I recall, it was stolen back.
Interesting. So it could have returned to Scotland.
But I think, but it was like in more modern times that it was stolen back. I could be like this. I could be like slightly making this up, but I'm imagining what I think is that it might have been some like a group of like college students like went over and like took it, but I don't know if it was then maybe taken back there. Like it's like
that's I think we definitely need some clued up viewers to tell us if we know where the stone is modern
stone
day. Yeah. So if we move on to the Clan Crest next. So the Bruce Clan Crest features a standing lion with its tail extended, which evokes bravery, valour, strength and royalty as well, which is understandable having that royal line. So also featured on the crest is the motto of Pumas, which translates to "We have been." It's typically thought that the motto is referencing the royal ancestry of the clan, which makes perfect sense. I mean, the clan is incredibly old, sort of goes way back, and they've had kings from sort of that point. So that does make sense that they'd include that into their motto and their crest as well.
For sure. So, I mean, going off of talking about, royalty, I think we're probably going to start mentioning our favorite guy.
He's got to have his own section, I feel.
Yeah, he will. But especially, so now we're going to talk about one of Bruce's most important battles. And really, when we say Bruce, we mean Robert the Bruce. So, can you guess which one we're going to talk about, Monja?
I mean, there's a very clear front runner in my mind.
Yeah.
I feel when you think of Bruce, you tend to think Bannockburn, but
there you go.
I'm sure brilliant.
You're correct.
A point for me,
so,
I feel.
Yes, a point for you. So the Battle of Bannockburn is one of the most famous battles in all of Scottish history, and I would say even, like medieval history in general. Bannockburn is very famous, and it's certainly one of the most revered for the Bruces. This is the battle that Robert the Bruce is most well known for, having led the Scots to victory during the First Scottish War of Independence. So very, very significant. The battle, so the battle took place on June 24th of 1314. And Bruce famously defeated English forces at Bannockburn effectively. So that battle wasn't like the very end of the First War, but what happened is that it just was effective at staving off the English attempts to control Scotland. And so it kind of eventually led to that ultimate victory. So, as I said, while the battle did not end the wars of Scottish independence, it's considered that defining moment that ultimately resulted in Scotland's independence for a period of time, of course.
Well, yes, it was a long history in the independence wars, but it's really interesting, and I feel like a lot of people might have heard of the Battle of Bannockburn, but maybe not know the significance of it in Scottish history. So it is really interesting, and of course, how much Bruce had to do with that.
Right.
So if you are a Bruce and you are interested in the family, you should definitely check out Family of Bruce International. So the society represents a combination of two previous Bruce organisations, Bruce International, which was founded in 1984, and Family of Bruce Society. So the nonprofit was founded in 2005 as a partnership between the two previously mentioned organisations, with the mission to create and promote kinship amongst members of Clan Bruce, as well as to encourage historical interest in the clan. And I feel like this clan, there is so much to learn and so much history that it's really well worth digging into and checking it out if you are a Bruce. And there's a lot of history to find out about your family, so definitely look them up.
And like as much as we love talking about Robert the Bruce, there are so many other historical Bruces. And today, I mean, even listing off everything that the current chief has done, it's a very impressive family. It's not all just Robert the Bruce and Ben.
He steals the show, but we've got other people to remember as well.
Right. So in case we didn't have enough connections to Robert the Bruce in this episode, if you're not familiar, if this is the first On the Sofa with Monja and I that you're watching, we kind of, always find some way, not always intentionally,
Not
to mention
always.
Robert the Bruce. So,
He
it's
does come up an awful lot,
he
so we
comes
do
up an awful lot.
apologize.
But I just wanted to briefly mention Loch Trool. This loch is quite significant to the Bruce clan because of Robert the Bruce's involvement in the Battle of Glen Trool. The battle took place in April of 1307, so prior to Bannockburn. And it was another great victory for King Robert. Not as famous as Bannockburn, but to commemorate the victory, there's a stone called Bruce's Stone that stands on the north side of the loch, and it can be visited today. So that's another, especially if the first stone is not in Scotland, that's another stone that you can go and visit.
There's always something to see.
There's always something to see, especially related to these medieval battles, because so many took place all over Scotland, and there are lots of stones and things to memorials and things to see. So Monja, taking a break from Robert the Bruce just for 1 second,
just a little bit.
So, switching over to tartan, can you tell us more about the different terms associated with tartan that we might see, like ancient and modern, and how they came about, and the tartan that you are currently wearing as well?
I'm modeling one right now. So before the 1860s, fabrics were generally colored using animal and vegetable dyes, which produced a lot sort of softer colors, more muted colors, which is what you tend to find in the ancient tartans. The pattern or set does remain the same across all varieties of a single tartan, and it's just the shades, tones, colors that change vary. So after the 1860s, chemical dyes were introduced to Scotland, and they tended to replace the natural animal and vegetable dyes, which is how you get the modern tartans. So they tend to be darker or bolder colors. So the Bruce tartan comes in 10 variations. We've got quite a selection, including the modern, which I'm wearing just now. So that's the nice bright red. But you can also get the ancient, weathered, and hunting. So loads of different colours, different options if you are Bruce. Each has a variety of different colours, but they tend to include reds, blues, and greens, which this one I'm wearing now has got the red as the base, green. We've also got a bit of yellow and white on there as well.
Love it. I don't know if I've really seen Bruce tartan prior to this.
I think the key ones that I see are the modern or the Bruce of Kinnaird, which is a slightly different variation and quite colourful. So you get a few different ones, but I would say the modern's probably most popular, at least in the shop, is what I tend to find.
Well, that's awesome. We love our bit of tartan, or a lot of tartan, either way. So let's now move on to one of my favorite parts. Certainly my favorite part of this episode, our famous faces. And I will go first with my absolute favorite, but really Monja.
I wonder who you're going to choose, Kalyn, as your favorite.
Could you imagine if I just switched it up and I didn't choose Robert the Bruce? Although I say this is my favorite, but this is really our favorite. If you know us,
this one for both of us.
Yes. Yeah, if you know us, you know that we love taking any opportunity to talk about him. So let's get right into it. So Robert the Bruce was, of course, King of Scots from 1306 until his death in 1329. He is an incredibly renowned, was rather, an incredibly renowned medieval warrior and remains one of Scotland's great heroes today. He was especially important during the First War of Scottish Independence, in which his actions successfully helped to regain Scotland's place as an independent kingdom in Britain. And, it didn't last forever, but
for a while.
That's really his number one claim to claim to fame, and there's a really great statue of Robert the Bruce that I understand is very popular. Have you been there, Monja?
I have. It was a very long time ago, but I have been.
I'd love to see it. That we already know that that's on my list. That's been on my list.
Absolutely.
But so, however, as great as all of that is, not all of the Bruce's life was so positively revered. Some things happened pre Bannockburn. So his involvement in John Comyn's murder in 1306, while a significant factor in him taking the throne, also actually led to his excommunication by Pope Clement V.
Not so
Yes.
great.
Yes. So, involved in a murder, excommunicated, but still king. So
depends what way you look at it. I suppose from a medieval point of view, you're still, yeah.
And then, shortly after these events, Edward I's forces defeated Robert in the Battle of Methven, which forced him to flee into hiding for a while. But by 1307, he had defeated an English army at Loudon Hill and began his quite famous guerrilla war against the English. And in 1314, we arrive at his most famous battle, Battle of Bannockburn, in which Robert defeated a much larger English army under Edward II and ultimately confirmed the reestablishment of an independent Scottish kingdom. So that's a short rundown of, if you really are unfamiliar with Robert the Bruce, that's really, the rundown of him.
Overview. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
he lived quite the life, so it's definitely worth checking out a bit of history on him.
And there are two great films about him. There's the Netflix one with Chris Pine that I think is called. You haven't seen that one. It's not called Robert the Bruce. The other one that came out more recently is called Robert the Bruce, I believe.
Okay.
The Netflix one is really great too. They it's not the same film really, like they show different it's called The Outlaw King. The Netflix one is The Outlaw King. So it's kind of, I think it if I recall, it does have a focus on that bit that I mentioned where he kind of, was excommunicated and then was kind of outlawed for a while. So whereas I think the other film has some slightly different events going on. So both are really, really good and worth looking at for sure.
I'll need to check those ones out. I've not seen them. I feel like I'm missing out now.
Yeah. I can't believe it, Monja.
More of our Bruce. So, although we do love Robert, as you can tell, we must talk about another absolutely wonderful Bruce, who is Rowena Mary Bruce, and she was basically a chess royalty, which is incredible. So Rowena was an English chess player whose claim to Bruce fame was holding the title of Women International Master, which is not easily done. So very impressive. She was actually an 11-time winner of the British Women's Chess Championship, which is an all-time record for the competition. Which is insane. So in 1935, she won the, I don't know if you say it FIDE. Do you say it in the initials? I do apologize to any chess fanatics. But she won the World Girls Championships, and later in 1951, she was awarded the same, but in the Women's International Grand Master title. So now Rowena's maiden name was actually Jew, but she became a Bruce when she married Ronald Bruce in 1940. So whether born or married into the family, we are sure the Bruces are very proud of this incredibly accomplished woman. And it's nice to have whichever way you come into the Bruce family, it's nice to have some accomplished women in there as well.
Yeah, especially with with something like chess.
Yeah, that takes a lot of
Yeah,
careful thinking, I think, for the chess.
for sure. And I agree. She sounds as though she's basically chess royalty. So yeah,
Absolutely.
put her up there
Absolutely.
right next to Robert the Bruce.
Yeah, just different ways of getting their fame, but
Yeah. I mean, chess was, really based on, um, practicing warfare, really. So,
that is true.
I mean,
Yes.
is she essentially not Robert the Bruce?
Yeah,
Like,
just more modern day.
yeah. So if you didn't know, we absolutely love reading and sharing customer stories as much as we love talking about Robert and Rowena and all of the other Bruces and the battles and everything. We really love hearing what you all are doing. So if you have a Bruce story that you're dying to share, please email us or tag us on social media. We'd love to see it and we'd love to share it as well.
Absolutely. And do send us photos to go along with your story, because it's so
Yes.
nice seeing your Bruce families, especially if you've got any tartan photos or anything. It's always lovely to see.
We love it.
So I believe to finish us off, we've got a few questions. So Kalyn, can you start us off with the first one?
Sure. So Mary asks if we can talk about any other castles associated with the Bruce family. Said Bruce a little too much in this video. I'm just kidding. We never talk about
It's never
Robert
enough.
too much. So we talked about Clackmannan Tower before. So the historic seat of the Lords of Annandale, the Bruces, or that line of Bruces, is Lochmaben, and it actually has an extraordinary history. Although it's been rebuilt a few times over the centuries, as our medieval castles tend to be. The original castle was of the Motte and Bailey style. I love this kind of castle. I love talking about this because people think that I mean like a moat.
Yeah, very different.
But that's not what I mean. So Motte and Bailey style. It was very popular during this period. You probably do recognize it from like popular works of historical fiction that feature a castle kind of situated atop some sort of raised earth and surrounded by water, which is like that is kind of like, that's what a moat is, that bit of water. However, so it's not too far off. However, the motte is actually in reference to the bit of earth that's raised up that the castle is sitting on, and the bailey, it's not a drawbridge. It's actually the courtyard of land that surrounded the raised castle, where there would be other little things. But so that is what Lochmaben would have looked like in Robert the Bruce's time. And yeah, as I mentioned, it's a very common style of castle that you saw in the 14th century.
It sounds very classic. Like when you picture a castle, that's sort of what you picture.
Exactly. That's where we get this like moat with the drawbridge and there's probably a sea monster in the water. And,
there's always a sea monster, yeah.
Well, yeah, there's always one.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. So our last question is from Jim, who wants to know if the Bruces have a plant badge, which they absolutely do. The Bruce plant badge is rosemary, which symbolises the remembrance of the clan's royal past. And last mention, their hero, Robert the Bruce. So
last mention, that's what you think.
Potential last mention for the evening. So it's again another lovely plant badge. I don't think we've come across any clans where their plant badge isn't something quite nice with a really lovely meaning behind it. So I think good job to all the clans being careful with their choices
selecting your plant badge. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think there we have it. We hope you've enjoyed learning about the Bruce family with us.
Mhm.
We've loved mentioning Robert the Bruce. That's the last one. I say to throw another one in there.
You had to get your last
I had
Robert
to
in
get.
there.
I had to do it. It had to be me. So filled with all of this new knowledge, if you would like to test that knowledge, just keep a lookout for our Bruce quiz that is coming soon.
Absolutely.
We'll see how you do.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you for tuning in, everyone.